Okay, welcome back, dear viewers. We're going to talk about maritime adventures and guns in this episode. We're more than halfway through um, Rules and Magic. We'll be getting to Magic pretty much at the next episode. So stay tuned. Keep listening. Um, Wanted to touch base on maritime adventures and the firearms presented in Lamentations of the Flame Princess because um, uh, they're they really are, especially the firearms section, really are what helps create and build the 17th century default setting that a lot of Lamentations of the Flame Princess games take place in. So, starting with Maritime Adventures, I think, just generally speaking, as an overview, the rules really do capture the danger of traveling on the high seas. As you'll see, they're pretty brutal and effective in terms of how um, what how weather's going to could potentially sink your ship. Okay, I mean to put it bluntly. So, but yeah, so the section starts with uh, essentially like the equipment section, a listing of the type of ships that you can get, everything from canoes to triremes to um, river galleys, long ships, cutters, galleons, and each ship has its own minimum required crew, sailing speed, rowing speed, cargo limit, and then ship hit points. Um, and I think you would have to look at the equipment section for the purchase cost of those, but um, that's essentially what you're looking at and how you can see what the statistics of the ships are. Um, there's a quick blurb of how the quality of the vessel will affect its speed and hit points. So, for example, an advanced vessel will have 15% greater speed and ship hit points. One ship hit point is equal to 10 hit points of damage. What is interesting is if something does 15 hit points of damage, the ship only takes one hit point, one ship hit point, and that other five is kind of ignored. It's not kept track in a second sort of line or category on your character sheet or anything like that. And then, of course, if a ship is reached to zero ship hit points, it sinks in 1d10 rounds. Um, Water conditions. Okay, this is a dense section, but once you sort of slowly go through it, it's actually really straightforward, and it's all based off of this one chart. So every day, the referee will roll a 2d6 to consult a chart to see how what the wind conditions are and what the speed adjustment is, and of course, if there's any conditions that will affect the ship. The referee has the discretion to modify this roll as deemed appropriate. If you roll a 12, you're basically in the middle of a storm. Galleys will sink 80% of the time. Galleys are essentially rowing vessels, so the water will accumulate, right? And all ships take 3d6 ship damage. You can avoid the damage by going with the wind, but then you're uh, moved in a random direction, and your speed is times three at this point. So, uh, for the day, you could be way off course, right? Um, if land is discovered during a storm, there's a 25% chance of finding safe harbor. Otherwise, the ship crashes. So there's a 1 in 4 chance you don't crash. Okay. Galleys have a 100% chance of finding safe harbor, especially if the storm was already, or the storm came about while they're already inside of land. If you roll a 2, there's no wind. You can't move unless you have a rowing vessel. Um, and for the high wind um, categories of speed and weather conditions, rolling ships just have a 10 to 20% chance of taking on water during um, those days, which will affect their movement and they'll take damage. So, um, all right, crew. Now, this is a pretty straightforward section, too, depending on how much crew you have, it'll affect the ship's performance. Um, Less than 100 but greater than 75%, you're going to see a 25% reduction in speed. You're going to take ship damage each day. The ship damage doesn't really increase as you lose crew, but your speed reduction increases pretty dramatically. And if you're less than a quarter, you're not moving, you're just drifting. So um, pretty straightforward there. Encounters, I think this is interesting. They're not much different from combat, standard combat, but there's a few things you got to do before you get into that combat. Um, Number one, ships can never surprise monsters at sea or other ships, but a monster can surprise a ship. And you roll 46 times 10 in yards for the encounter distance. If you watch any of these movies, like Master and Commander, there's a lot of lead up to before the combat begins, and it includes people trying to outrun whoever's chasing them. So there is some interesting rules here that are really simple. I actually like this because he could have gotten crunchy and started talking about movement speeds and whatnot. But if the fleeing ship is faster than the pursuing ship, there's an 80% chance they get away. If they're equal, it's 50%. If they're slower, there's a decrease of 10% for every 30 foot of movement that the escapee is slower. I mean, it's pretty straightforward and easy. Um, if successful, the pursuing group cannot catch up for 24 hours. On a failure, the pursuer will gain 10 yards per round if slower than or equal to the escapee's speed. Otherwise, you use the pursuer's speed each round. And then you can get into the nuts and bolts of combat. And like I said, it basically functions as any other encounter, um, except you can target the ship as well as the men on the other ship or monsters that are in the water. Um, you can repair damage at sea, provided you have the crew to do it, and depending on how damaged the ship is. So half of a crew's complement a full day to repair one. A full complement can repair two. If a ship takes more than 50% damage, it cannot be repaired at sea more than half original ship hit points. So basically, if you have 10 ship hit points and you're down to 4, you can repair up to 5, and then you got to find harbor. If you're below 25%, there's no repairing the ship. You got to find safe harbor to repair. Um, Rules for ramming and use of catapults. Crew size will affect the attack rate of the catapult, and you cannot attack anything within minimum range. I like that. So basically, if you're in this like tactical situation, ship to ship combat, and they're bombarding you with catapults, maybe you should get into boarding action range to avoid getting damaged by the catapult. Heck, maybe you want to ram the opposing ship. Catapult's attack is a fighter level equal to the crew size, so if you're undermanned, it's not going to be as effective. Um, and then there's the ramming rules give two sets for damage for large ships, small ships, and whether you're ramming another ship or ramming like a sea monster or something. I really appreciate that he made sure that their monsters were addressed in these rules because, let's face it, sea monsters can be cool. Okay, and then the section ends with boarding actions. This is the fun stuff. This is like the swashbuckling stuff that we see in the movies, and this is again treated very simply and easy. If both sides want to board, there's nothing you need to worry about. They're boarding. Otherwise, there's a 35% chance of success. Once a board combat ensues, and while boarding, there's a -2 AC to attack. I think that's put in there to for the player characters that are engaged in this that are engaged in the boarding action. If you fail on the chance to board, you just basically couldn't maneuver to get close enough, and you'll have to try again. Okay, so that's pretty much it for Maritime. It's really easy and quick. So that's why we're going to talk about a section in the back of the book called Firearms. I'm not going to go into a line by line analysis because These rules were derived from some serious research into the types of firearms at the of the 17th century. In fact, I would be so bold as to say that this section may have set the standard for some of the modules that are out there. Who, the writers did some research to make sure they are pay homage and are consistent with role playing in the 17th century. And when you read this section, because it's more than just firearms, it's got some armor that's a little bit more period accurate, as well as some additional equipment. This really helps with world building if you want to play in a 17th century game. So basically, pistols can be used as melee weapons, as can the arquebus and muskets. Um, Musket requires a fork rest to fire, otherwise a -2 to hit. And there are three types of guns, and then a rifled barrel. All of these types of firearms have their own sort of tweak on how they will be used and their cost. Firearms are not cheap. So the matchlock is the default gun, and all subsequent types modify the rules of the matchlock. So what is a matchlock? Basically, a fire mechanism is a lit match or cord secured in a clamp. When the trigger is pulled, it drops the match into a priming pan. This ignites some gunpowder that's in there, which then travels a thing called a touch hole, which then ignites coarser powder within, and then kaboom, the bullets out. Takes 10 rounds to reload, 8 for fighters. I do like that fighters, because they fight, that this is their specialty. They can do this faster than other character classes. I like that. Uh, Range penalties are doubled, so it's -4, -8 for medium and long. There's a 2 in chance of misfire. This gets a little annoying, but you got to make sure your players are rolling a D10 along with their D20 to hit. Um, Damp conditions can double the chance of misfire, and typo there. Wet conditions quadruples the misfire chance. Um, gun Guns ignore the first 5 points of armor at short range. This makes them very effective, especially the pistol. When you have your players closing in for melee. Um, Muskets, that 5 is ignored. The 5 points of armor is ignored for all ranges. And all guns do 1d8 damage. They're a very effective weapon, but they're slow. It's sort of like a one and done thing right in the beginning of combat. And what I really like is the discharge of a firearm causes an immediate morale check. In my Lamentations of Elemental Evil campaign, I've been staying true to that, and that has helped the party on more than one occasion. All right, so the wheel lock uses an internal mechanism which allows the gun to be ready to fire with no outside source of ignition. It's a highly complicated design. It costs 7 times that of a matchlock. However, there's no additional misfire chances due to environmental conditions. However, if you're going to use it as a club, there's a 1 in 4 chance of breaking the mechanism, and you're probably going to have to get a new gun. All right, the flintlock replaces the match with a small piece of flint, which strikes a piece of steel, which ignites the powder in the priming pan. This has a 1 in 10 chance of misfire, so it's a little better, right? Doubles the cost of the gun, but reload times are halved. Fighters get to round down, everyone else rounds up. This is a really nice. I like the flintlock. I think it's a nice weapon. All right, so then you can also get your barrels rifled. I didn't know this. I'm not a historian in firearms. So most firearms at the time are smooth bore, which just means it's a smooth tube, right, metal tube, and that creates inaccuracies for the gun. But if you get the barrel rifle, puts a spin on the bullet and off it goes, and it becomes a little bit more um, accurate, and that eliminates range penalties. So you go from -4, -8 to -2, -4. This will double the cost of the gun, but it also increases the reload time by 1.5. So, and the thing to keep in mind here is when purchasing your guns, all modifiers are cumulative. A rifled wheel-lock musket costs 40 silver pieces times 7 times 2 for a total of 560 silver pieces. You can see how this adds up, but you are using and getting a really high-tech weapon that will have benefits beyond just doing damage. Like I said, the morale check I think is really key to the use of a firearm. The section also has a really nice exposition on armor and gear of the 17th century. This is more, uh, I guess, period accurate. In the equipment section, it's standard, Dungeons and Dragons, fantasy role playing. You got leather armor, you got chain armor, you got plate armor. In this section of the book, you're looking at things like buff coats, which I really like. It's just a yellow leather jacket that adds +1 to your AC. But there's pikeman's armor that you can get. It gives rules for helmets and the different types of helmets. Um, it's got tassets, lobster tail pot helms, morions, secretes. I think that's how you pronounce it. Uh, you know, again, it helps with the world building. It gets your players sort of immersed in the actual gear being used in the 17th century. Um, some other equipment here that I'll note. It's obviously got shot and bags of powder, and if you're hit with a fire attack while carrying some of this stuff, you could explode. But one I'd like to point out that I didn't even know was a thing was something called the 12 Apostles. It's a bandolier of pre-measured shot. Um, Again, if you're hit with a fire attack, you'll take damage depending on how many apostles you have left. But it can reduce your reload times by one. And if you were looking at the Maritime adventures and wondered where are the cannons, and mortars, you'll find them here. Uh, so there you have it. Quick video today. Both sections of the book, especially the firearms, uh, I think really help with the world building of a 17th century game. I think the maritime rules are really simple and deadly, but realistic. Traveling the high seas was not something you just did willy nilly. It was an endeavor. It was you're going off into the unknown. And I like the firearms. I think they're a bit crunchy, but not too crunchy. It's just stuff you need to remember. And I think in the heat of battle, in combat, you can easily forget. I know I do. But I got some great players in my Lamentations of Elemental Evil campaign who are, reminding me that they're rolling their misfire chances, that sort of thing. So anyway, I do like these um, firearm rules. Better than some of the ones I've seen in the past. Not that there's too many out there. I seem to recall second edition Dungeons and Dragons incorporated some, and they were really simplistic and didn't really feel like firearms as they should be dealt with because they're complicated but deadly. So, anyway, that's it, everyone. I hope the sound quality on this is better. Something happened in my last recording. Um, so I hope this one's better. Tonight, October 15th, I will be running a Halloween one shot. I think I have about 5 or 6 victims. We're going to be done running Death, Love, Doom. So by the time you listen to this, I'll either have that already recorded or I will be recording it. So check that out. I'm really excited. It's probably one of the more horrific modules I've ever read. And one last thing I got to shill for myself. I published a game, supplement for cowpunchers. It's called Midnight Prairie. If you like cowboy western games but want to add a little weirdness, Midnight Prairie will help you do that. I have monsters, psychics, kung fu, aliens, all kinds of neat stuff in there. Fear effects. It's $4 at Big Geek Emporium, or you can go to my itch.io page. All right, that's it. If you liked what you heard, please hit like, subscribe, bell icon, yada yada yada. Until next time.